Hey there, and welcome to the latest episode of the MindBodyHealth Podcast with myself, Dave Sheahan, high performance consultant and dedicated for over 25 years now. Shockingly how long, but over 25 years to educating, motivating, and I do hope inspiring you guys to live your best life, to keep evolving into the best version of you, and to turn your visions and your dreams into reality, because the power is there for you. And importantly, having a foundation of having control of the mind, body, and health, because it truly does have a catalytic impact on every single area of your life. So that's why I'm so passionate about this area. That's why I do the podcasts and all the other kind of work I do in this area, and why I invite such incredible guests onto the podcast. And today we have another special guest for this episode. It's Rohini Bajekal, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who's a highly regarded and respected nutritionist. She coaches people on moving and transitioning into a plant-based lifestyle. She's a co-author with her mom on Living PCOS free. She's had an incredible journey herself, which she'll share with us, as well as so much information. There's the book there, if you're watching on video. And it's going to be an awesome interview. And she's a wonderful person, passionate about what she does. And when people are passionate, they have a lot to share. So Rohini, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for such a warm welcome, Dave. I'm really excited to be here and talk a bit more about plants, my story, and just everything. Such a lovely, beautiful day in London as well. The sun is out, and definitely going to go for a nice long walk later today.
Yeah, hopefully the sun's going to come out here. I don't think it's as frequent as it is over there, here, especially Southwest Ireland, but hopefully it's going to come out. It always makes such a difference. Look, as I said, you're very passionate what you do. You're very knowledgeable. You're highly regarded for a very good reason because of the work that you do. You've had an incredible journey. So we always start off the podcast with going back to the start. You know, where in your life did mindset, exercise, nutrition, all those kind of areas become more important to you? Where did you become more conscious of their relevance and impact? And just share a bit about your journey so the listeners and the viewers can learn more about who you are.
Wonderful. So yes, I suppose it really starts with my family. My parents are both surgeons. I know my mum's been on a podcast recently, and she is quite a powerhouse, along with my dad. So they had very busy jobs when we were growing up, and moved to the UK when I was 2.5, and my sister was born in Scotland, and we moved around the country a lot. Those were quite high pressure years on my parents, where they were trying to be, to grow. They were immigrant doctors in the NHS. They were loving what they did, but they were raising 2 young children without any family or support network here. So it was pretty tough. I think unpleasant and very difficult at times. And really, we had a lovely, close nuclear family in England. We had each other and we had lovely quality time together, but it was pretty intense. But we tended to eat, home cooked food most of the time, home cooked Indian food. So we're from the part of India that's south, so South India. And we would eat a lot of things like dal, local, regional Indian foods, rice, all of those things. And then gradually Naina and I, my sister, we ate meat at school and at friends' houses, and then gradually in the house as well. My parents, I think my mum shared as well that she'd grown up vegetarian, my dad hadn't. And in India, a lot of the times people grow up vegetarian for religious or caste reasons, and it's not necessarily an ethical choice, not always. And so she kind of just thought, oh, let them eat what everyone else is eating. And when we were about 11, I was about 11, my sister was a few years younger than me, and she decided, she said once we got a dog, we made that connection and we felt really wrong to eat animals, so we were vegetarian. And then a few years later, she's now a journalist and editor, so it's not surprising where she got that curiosity streak from, but she did her own research, was very young, but she made the connection about the dairy industry and the meat industry, and that was it. She realized it was all connected and that she didn't want to be part of that anymore. So my mum and I joined her. It took me about 6 months. I found it very hard to give up seafood and fish. I was weaned on that. That's a big part of my dad's culture in South India, and I found that quite challenging. But I was vegan as a teenager, which was highly unusual. This is over 20 years ago. A very, very different world. It's hard for sometimes people to understand just how different it was. People did not know what the word vegan was. We used to shop at special stores to get soya milk. I didn't know any other vegans apart from my mum and my sister, never met any. And honestly, we were just the odd ones out. We were the only vegans in the village, let alone being an Asian family that, we 3 of us were vegan. My dad joined us only recently, several years ago, but not back then. And so he was
There's such a stigma
following
as
kind of
well to
pescatarian.
vegan. Like at that time, definitely such a stigma. There was less availability of products. Like you said, you had to go to certain places, and you with that and being immigrants and surgeons and the busy lives, like it was quite a lot to take as a teenager. So you must have had quite a strong mind to stick to your guns over that. Would you?
Yes, I did. And I had a really lovely group of friends at school who supported me. And the only place we could go out to eat was Wagamama because they had a vegan option, but nowhere else. None of the chains did. And when you're a teenager, that's kind of part of your life. So like going out with friends once a week or doing things. And my mum would bake a lot. My parents would cook most things from scratch because you couldn't get vegan cakes for birthday parties. You couldn't get things like that. There were a few accidentally vegan things like bourbon biscuits, but we didn't really have like the options that we have now. I remember going to the first ever veg fest in London and my sister and I fighting over a cupcake because we were the last to get there that day. And we were like, no. And, it was like hilarious looking back. I think I would have fainted if I walked into a modern day supermarket and seen all the choices on offer.
It's interesting to say the veg fest, just jumping in the veg fest thing, like, because think of back then, like when you were going, it was such a unique thing to go to these events and to see vegan cakes and vegan everything. And because there was so little availability, whereas that's kind of taking a little, the way there's such availability now is taking a little bit of the gloss off these kind of events because it's not as unique anymore.
I still think it's special to have these places to connect with other plant-based eaters, vegans, to have that experience where you're normal. You're not the person asking for something different. And that's really important, I think, for yourself and for just to have a space where you don't have to be questioned. I think that's important for every human being. So that was really lovely. I'm very open about the fact my vegan journey was not perfectly linear at all. I wish I'd been vegan consistently from the age of 12, 13, but unfortunately that's not really how it went. When I was at Oxford University, I really struggled with my mental health, and that's really when I started seeing all the signs of polycystic ovary syndrome, which is the most common hormone condition to affect women and people assigned female at birth. And that's why my mother and I wrote our book, Living PCOS Free, because I personally have the condition. And for those of you who don't know, that's it's a condition that affects how the ovaries function, but it results in lots of quite stigmatizing symptoms. So cystic acne, scalp hair loss, weight gain, insulin resistance. It can result in excess hair growth, sleeping problems, mental health issues. So it's wide-ranging. Every single person experiences it differently. One of the hallmark symptoms is having irregular periods. So if you have irregular periods, it's really important for anyone who does menstruate to know that that's not normal, unless you're on obviously birth control or you're pregnant or anything like that, but you need to get that checked out. So when I was at university, I was in shock because I thought when I'd get there, I was going to meet lots of other people who are like-minded, who care about people, animals, the planet. That didn't happen. I didn't meet anyone else who was vegan when I was there. And in fact, my very first day was that people were having a hog roast, like that's an entire pig, in the garden at someone's house. And I was horrified. I couldn't even walk into the house. I couldn't believe that I was being glorified. It wasn't, I thought, gosh, is this like the 1800s? This
like the Vikings or something.
Exactly. And then the next day was a greyhound race. Everyone was going to greyhound racing. And I just thought, I don't fit in here at all. I did, eventually make some lovely friends, and I have very fond memories. It's an amazing privilege to go to university there. But I did struggle because for the first time I was away from my family home. I wasn't having all that amazing, nourishing South Indian food. And that was just part of my lifestyle. My parents cooked everything. They, made Italian food, Thai food, everything, because once we went vegan, our whole palate changed, which happens to so many people. And when people think it's all about restriction, but it's so often about abundance. When you bring in different foods, you try so many different cuisines from other cultures that have been plant predominant or plant-based for centuries. This is not a new thing, and that's so important to mention. This has existed in various cultures which have prioritized plants, which have celebrated plants over the years. So we had already experienced that, but when I was at university, I struggled because it was, a high pressure environment, didn't really have that much access to a kitchen. And often I would get these really pathetic dinners where everyone else would be chucking into a chocolate fondant for dessert, and I would get a tangerine I couldn't open. So it was kind of really upsetting. I was like, you can make that but vegan. I knew that. And for me, I wasn't on a diet or anything like that. I wanted to be able to eat those things once in a while. And I ended up eating a lot of ultra processed vegan foods. So I turned to things like chips and alcohol and other things to kind of pick myself up. And just because I didn't really understand anything about nutrition, I wasn't obviously a nutritionist back then. I was reading theology, so very different. And I did put on some weight, but mostly the effects were on my mental health. I really struggled with anxiety. I'd often have days where I couldn't leave my bedroom. And I was also dealing with the symptoms of PCOS, which you can imagine having things like hair loss or acne in your 20s suddenly, in your early 20s. It's just really shocking when you haven't experienced it as a teenager.
The peer pressure and everything, like, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a struggle, and by the time my last year at uni, I really felt like I just need to blend in as much as possible. I can't be myself, and this is the only way I'm going to survive in the world. So I started to eat some dairy when I'd go out. In my own house, I was always vegan, but I just felt very lost. And this is why I'm so passionate about what I do now and how I kind of found my way back to veganism in my mid-20s, because having those years where, those 5-6 years where I was quite lost and I had been disconnected from my values, I wasn't living in alignment with my values. It caused me a lot of inner turmoil, Dave. So it was not easy. I think once you know, you can't unknow. But at the same time, the world was so different then that I didn't want to have to constantly talk to the waiter for 20 minutes when I go into a restaurant. I didn't want to have to explain myself on every date and explain what a vegan was. People used to ask me if I used to rummage in the bin, and I was like, no, that's a vegan. I just don't want to hurt animals. And no one really understood it. So it was hard, but I kind of give myself some self-compassion. I go back then because I have had judgment from people when I explain this, but I say, look, this is why we need community. This is why we need to support people. This is why we need to stop shaming people. We need to actually support them on their journey so they can make, for them, plant-based eating, veganism, whatever it is. They're two obviously distinct things. One is an ethic of justice and everything, but whatever behavior change they want, whether it's sobriety or changing their diet, we need to support them, not shame them, and also understand that everyone's journey is different. And what works for one person might not work for another, in the sense that everyone, some people might be able to go vegan overnight, other people it might be a more gradual transition, and that's why I do what I do. I'm really passionate about helping them. But I think a lot of people who are in the sort of more plant-based or wellness space and things have had an experience where they felt disconnected from their mind and body.
It's been a journey, and this is where, like we spoke before we came on, that authenticity is so important. And it's like, for you, the difficulties you had in that period, and like you said, mental health issues and so on, and not feeling authentic to yourself, not being true to your values and your beliefs, and making sacrifices that you really didn't want to do, but to try and fit in, or just to make life a bit easier, you nearly felt you had to. And this is where, when people do feel a bit lost and they are suffering in some mental health issues, a lot of time that is what it is. They're not being authentic, not being true to themselves, they're not being true to their values, just not being able to be themselves. Because when you are truly yourself, in some ways it's nearly like a superpower, because you freed yourself. And this is why, like you said,
I can't agree
so much
more.
acceptance of so many different things. People need to be who they are and stop hiding behind, a veil, which is hard, because that's society. Society is nearly pushing out there what success supposedly looks like, happiness supposedly looks like, man, woman, whatever supposedly looks like, when you just have to be who you are. And this is why these kind of conversations are so important.
Couldn't agree more. I think once I started to be myself and be unique in all those ways that everyone is unique, you exude a kind of inner confidence. People are attracted to you, they want to be around you, the right people come into your life, and that is an amazing thing. But I just didn't know that when I was in my early 20s, and my coping mechanisms were not healthy. So I would to engage in self-destructive behaviors like binge drinking, because that was what people did at university. I thought I had to do that to fit in. And it was a kind of coping mechanism for anxiety, for all the thoughts going on in my head. And it was the way I could shut it off, the noise, but then it would send me on a vicious cycle where I would then not sleep afterwards. I'd be even more anxious, self-loathing, full of despair for days afterwards. It would really affect me chemically. You know, I would be, we know that alcohol is a depressant, we know there's no health benefits, but yet it's something that it's normalized to binge drink or have functional addiction, and even dysfunctional addiction where, you know, you're not able to really cope. And I had definite issues in that area. So I think now, on looking back, I just really want to kind of give myself as much compassion as possible, because I did not do that when I was younger, and so, that's very important.
Yeah. That compassion is really important. Because the thing is, it's part of your journey, and you know, I very much believe everything happens for a reason. And you know, when we go through these kind of dark times, especially for what you do now, if you hadn't experienced that period of time in your life and come through it, especially, you wouldn't be able to be such an incredible coach and, you know, advisor and educator, and so passionate about it now, because you can draw on your own journey, and it also makes you very relatable, which is even more important, because then people can relate to, actually, yeah, I was like that, or I am like that, or aspects of your story, they can see themselves in it, and then that makes them pay a bit more attention, and then they'll start to apply some of what you're saying helped you. And you know, that's where the benefit of our stories are. We all have stories, and it's important we share them.
Couldn't agree more. I think that so often we can have compassion for others or for the planet or for animals, but we do need to not forget about ourselves. We need to remind ourselves that it starts with self-compassion. That's not selfish. That's where it needs to start, because once we have compassion for ourselves, we can actually nurture ourselves. We can look after our inner child. We can live in a way that's most authentic, and that's something I really care about. I do share a bit of my own journey and things with clients, so I reassure them that, you know, I'm not judging them, because so often when you see a health professional, you kind of think they have all the answers and I'm just this person that's lost and I don't have a clue. But so often we actually do have the answers, and that's what I work with my clients. It's often they know where they're perhaps going wrong, where they're struggling, but it just takes sometimes a bit of guidance. I sort of see myself, and that's the beauty of lifestyle medicine, when you're working hand in hand with someone, you're working as a team together. You're not working where you're the expert and they're the subject or whatever. You know, it's working together and collaboratively, which is really important. But I did, you know, there is kind of like a happy ending. Well, I don't think it's an ending. I'm still on a journey, and I still have ups and downs, which I share on social media and other things, where I do try to share these things. But in my mid-20s, I moved to India, which was somewhere that I held with a lot of fondness. I was very close to my grandparents, both sets of my grandparents, and they actually had incredibly healthy lives where they inspire me. I think back to how much my grandfather would meditate, or how they would walk every day, or how my grandmother kept her brain really active, and, you know, all of them lived very long lives, and my grandmother read voraciously right up until she passed away and things. So I think back to I think I got a lot of strength from my grandparents and from my culture. So when I moved to India, when I was in my mid-20s, I was working within the health and wellbeing industry after leaving my earlier career in public relations and marketing. And that's really when I started to make the connection with foods and mental and physical health. So before, when I had been vegan, I kind of didn't really make that connection about self-compassion and choosing foods that were nourishing for my body and for my mind. And when I was in India, I started to make that connection again about, okay, these are the foods from my culture. I started to eat fruit without worrying about all the sugar and things, because I had this mistaken belief that, you know, fruit was too sugary, and that I would have instead like a protein bar. Yeah, I would have a protein bar instead of a banana, and just things like that I think back and God, that's just, what was I thinking?
Just to quickly jump in there, Rohini, just before, because it's an important part of your story you're sharing right now about when you moved to India. Just curious, before you moved, because that was a few years before, with a difficult time for you, and like you said, mental health wise, and how you felt, you know, sacrificing your values and so on. When you went to India, had you begun the journey towards rectifying all of that, or was nearly when you moved to India when it started to rectify and seeing where your grandparents lived and making changes yourself in career and lifestyle?
So I had an inkling that something's not right. You need to almost be in that place where there's a push factor, where you're kind of like, I need to make a change. And I realized that I was coasting along, and that I wanted more for my life. My parents had left, the country when they were India when they were 30, and they've moved. And I think that was always in my head. I'm never just going to stay in the UK. I want to get out and see the world. There's a whole world out there. So I had that feeling, but I started to dabble in a few things. Like, I would go to the gym, and I'd noticed that my skin would improve and things, but I was at my wit's end, honestly, Dave. I had tried so many things for my acne. I'd gone to see a dermatologist, a naturopath, dietitian, so many different people, and nothing had worked. I'd gone on loads of antibiotics and medications, and I knew that there was something more, but I knew that my lifestyle in London was not conducive to making big changes. I needed to do something radical to get myself out of this place, and that's why I moved. I got the opportunity, and I thought, okay, I'm in my mid-20s, I am single, I don't have a mortgage. And not that should ever hold someone back, in the sense that you can make a change at any time in your life. But where I was, I thought, okay, I've got to do this now. This is it. And so when I moved there, I was, looking for something. I was looking to make a change in my life. And that came about because of the way that the lifestyle was. And I think I just started to be my authentic self. I felt that I could be myself, connect with my culture, with my roots, and I started to eat home-cooked Indian food, fresh fruit every day, things like I'd get a fresh coconut and have the coconut water. I just was naturally eating less processed foods, and it changed my mental health, my physical health, my PCOS symptoms, and it was honestly transformative. So I really credit that shift, making a bold choice. And I think sometimes you do need to kind of look at your life and go, okay, you don't have to live this life just because you've invested X amount of time in your career or X amount of time in a relationship. You've got to think regularly. I try to introspect and think, what can I do to push myself? What can I do to make my life better? So it's something I'm still doing and trying to incorporate into my life now. I don't want to just stop just because I'm not going to keep shifting countries, every year, but there's still ways you can bring in change into your everyday life. It could be taking up a new hobby, or it could be traveling to somewhere, even for a holiday that you wouldn't usually go, or going on a new walking path. It could be anything like that.
Like I always stress to people that literally your entire life every day should be about evolving to a better version of yourself, and it never ends until you literally take your last breath. And we can keep growing and developing and being better in terms of every aspect, not just health. People always think it's health. It's every single aspect, because even like you said with your grandmother, and the way she used to read voraciously, and feeding her brains and stimulating her brains and giving herself new skills, and then also of course in health and well-being, it's endless how many positive changes you can make, and it's step by step.
I completely agree. And there is so much ageism in our culture, where we kind of feel that only when you're youthful can you make big changes, or are you worth investing in. But that's just something I really want to combat, both in terms of I meet people who are amazing, and I have friendships across so many different ages with people who, and I think it's really important to remember that you're not too old or too young to make a change. My parents always really treated my sister and I as full autonomous beings from the time we were born, where we were given a lot of respect in terms of knowing our mind and knowing what we wanted to do. A lot of parents, if their child was kind of a teenager and said they want to go vegan, are going to say, yeah, that's not happening. I'm cooking all your meals, that's not happening. And I know loads of people who went vegetarian whose parents sort of said, no, you're not doing that. But my parents were always about supporting us. Obviously, if we were doing something harmful to ourselves, they would be different about it. And my mum wanted to educate herself about these things, and she realized that quite often your children or young people can know more than you do. It's not just about your age or your hierarchy. And actually viewing that world that way has been beneficial, because you can learn from everyone. You can learn from a child.
We all have something to offer, like every single one of us, like you said, and that's what's important. It could be a child, it could be someone who's 90, it could be someone who's seen as very successful, famous, whatever, down to someone who isn't seen the complete opposite, and they can both learn from each other. Like this thing, like everyone has something to offer, and like it's great that your parents were like that, because typically most parents are gonna nearly tied into the whole societal conditioning thing of you have to be a certain way, you have to look a certain way, you have to do certain types of jobs. Like the uniqueness is being crushed in children, unfortunately. It's the way the system kind of nearly runs. Instead of it being embraced and, children being encouraged to be whoever they are, it's nearly, you're meant to be a certain way and it's just go a certain path. Whereas we should be constantly encouraging children, just let them be who they are. As you said, of course, if someone's doing something destructive or not good, or they're definitely going the wrong path, redirect, of course. But we need to learn the lessons from the wrong paths too sometimes. But we need to embrace uniqueness and let children and people, because it could be someone 40, 50, could be trying to find themselves still. We need to let people really try to find themselves and keep breaking down these chains of societal conditioning of what supposedly we're meant to do and look like and so on.
Definitely. Couldn't agree more.
So in India, so that was a big part of the catalyst in terms of your life changing. Like, of course, the brain connection in terms of mental health and all can be huge in terms of even hydration, the food you were consuming, there was all of that, plus you being happier in yourself. So it's a mixture of all of those things. That's why I'm always stressing to people, the mind, body, health area really is a foundation to everything because it impacts everything positively. And, obviously there is yourself, finding yourself being more authentic, relating back to your values and living your values. But even just the fact you're eating different kind of foods, consuming different kind of liquids in a different even kind of climate and environment, they all impacted your brain massively as well. I think people need to start realizing and learning that, what we're consuming in every sense, knowledge, information, people, as well as food and liquids, has such an impact on our brain, when I think it's about 20% of even calories, for instance, goes to your brain to feed it. So everything we're consuming in every sense is having a huge impact on our brain. That'll have a huge impact on our own mental health or well-being or energy and literally how we live our lives.
I couldn't believe it, honestly, Dave. I was waking up feeling so energetic, so light. I wasn't finished drinking. I was, just eating mostly whole plant foods, nourishing my body. I developed incredible friendships. I met my husband out there. It was amazing. It was a transformative period in my life. And that was the time when I kind of realized I need to know more about nutrition. And I started to read up on some of the science and learn for myself. I came back to the UK to do my master's in nutrition and food science because I wanted to have a degree. It's very important to me to be qualified in the area. So I'd be a credible voice. I had to learn statistics again, like teach myself A-level biology and chemistry over the summer. But I was very dedicated. I was probably the keenest person in the classroom, to be honest, because I was a mature student. And I did find, again, when I came back and did my master's, I was struggling because in a lot of the classes, the teachers were sort of saying that plant-based diets are inadequate, vegan diets are inadequate, and you need to have fish and eggs. Oily fish are really important, so eggs. So I started to eat oily fish and eggs, which honestly, it's just horrible. But when I did that, it was very interesting because then a few months later, I noticed I wasn't feeling as good mentally, and even though I was working out a lot and I was walking a lot and I was eating the typical healthy kind of whatever people think is salmon and broccoli and things like that. When I had my blood test done, I came out as pre-diabetic, and that was a big shock because I was in my mid-20s, and I was just horrified because I was lean, very lean, and on the outside I would look perhaps extremely healthy to someone, but on the inside I wasn't. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to actually understand this for myself, because even though I was studying nutrition, I hadn't gone and done my own independent research as much before then. So I went and did the eCornell course. I started looking, and that's with a plant-based nutrition course, and I started to read up on the science myself and you can really understand the nuts and bolts of what plant-based diets are and how they can help reduce insulin resistance, reverse insulin resistance in the early stages, which we know is one of the hallmarks of PCOS. And I have a very strong family history of type 2 diabetes. My dad was type 2 diabetic at the time. My aunts and uncles, everyone was. So, and that's very common in South Asians. We know that South Asians in the UK are 6 times likelier to have type 2 diabetes than their white British counterparts. And if you're a child and you're South Asian, you're 10 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes. So you can have diabetes in childhood as well. And I was terrified. I was like, I'm doing nutrition, I need to get them top. So my dad changed to a whole food plant-based diet after watching Forks Over Knives, and he saw radical results, being able to put his diabetes in remission. And I followed suit, and that was really when I started to connect with veganism again. Because in India I'd been having all the whole plant foods, but I hadn't necessarily made that connection back to my roots again, where I was like, okay, I and even that was it. I was no going back from that. And I spent the rest of the course, talking to teachers back in class and saying, no, this isn't true about iron or calcium. These are all myths. I knew the science, so I felt very confident. And that's why I say to people, you don't have to go and become a nutritionist, but what you do have to do is empower yourself with some nutrition basics so that you can hopefully live a long and healthy life as a plant-based eater. And also it helps with conversations that you have with people when they ask you questions like, what about B12 or what about iron? You don't need to have all the answers, but at least you can point them to the right resources. So I work for an organisation now called Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. I head up communications, which is an organisation dedicated to promoting the health benefits of a whole food plant-based diet and also planetary health as well. And this is for the prevention, management and treatment of chronic diseases. So we're a group of about 1,000 UK healthcare professionals, but a lot of people in our group are not healthcare professionals. They're just maybe people like yourself who are super passionate about well-being, about plant-based nutrition, about veganism. Many people are vegan in the group. And we have loads of different fact sheets. So plant-based diets for celiac disease, plant-based diets for stroke, plant-based diets for pregnancy, plant-based diets for all of the, and they're totally free. 90+% of our resources are free. And I hold webinars with people. It's an amazing platform, but I just send people to that site and say, if you've got any questions, this answers everything. And that's all you need to know, really. But I think when I was doing my nutrition degree, I realized, okay, it's going to be hard being a nutritionist that's plant-based out there in the world. Kind of, there's not going to be as many clients, or is it going to be hard? But I decided that I was going to take the plunge. I worked in Singapore for a bit after that, and then came back and launched my practice. And it was a difficult time with the pandemic, but also an opportunity in some ways, because a lot of things switched to virtual, and that was a great way to connect with more people around the world as well. But that's when I kind of realized there's no going back. And even though something sometimes feels niche, or you think no one's going to be interested in this, it's amazing how the space has changed. And working with people, so not everyone I work with is plant-based, but my job is to shift them towards eating more plants. And that's really the focus of my practice, is that everyone can benefit from eating more plants. Obviously, many people I work with are vegan and trying to optimize their diet, but there are a lot of people who come to me who sort of say, I'm a bit lost, and they maybe had similar journeys to me, where they hear a nutrition myth, or they're told, okay, you're pregnant, you can't follow a plant-based diet, and then they go back to eating fish and eggs and other things. And that's where people like me come in to help guide them and say, no, this is where you can get your nutrition from. So I try to keep it really practical for people. I think it's important to understand that we are not living in this perfect world where we're on an organic farm, living in tune with nature all the time. We have to take supplements, we have to take medications if we need them, but a plant-based diet and lifestyle medicine will always help us no matter where we're at. It's going to benefit us in so many different ways.
Yeah, like what you're doing is so important, because I think that's the missing link nearly, in that things need to be simplified a lot for people, because again, there is definitely a growing, very much growing desire to move more towards plant-based. People becoming a bit more aware of the reality. People are starting, that disconnect that has always been there between what's on the plate to the actual animals that were nearly cooing over in the field. I always say the example of lambs, especially springtime, people pass in countryside areas, oh, look at the cute little lambs or whatever, and go home to lamb dinner. And it's just a disconnect. And that's definitely starting to be broken down more and more. But where people have the challenge then is, God, how do I do it? I cut out all this food. What am I going to eat? Typically then they just go to like pasta, cereals, processed foods, chocolate, confectionery, and it's not good for their health. So there's quite a lot of unhealthy plant-based livers, let's say, and that's why a lot of time they revert back. So you're playing a very, very important role, and people same as you in the same kind of roles, to just show people these simple little steps they can take to just gradually incorporate and transition themselves into the lifestyle. And how amazing it is then, even like you touched on earlier, in terms of the food, the variety, the colors, the taste, like it's so endless. Like
it is, and I'm such a foodie. I love my food, and having just that variety, that abundance of plants, it's and you can do this in a variety of ways. I also volunteer for the UK's first plant-based community kitchen and cookery school, which is also has an eco-friendly focus called Made in Hackney, which is quite famous now. And Made in Hackney, my mum and I used to do virtual, well, we still do virtual oil-free Indian cooking classes, and I also volunteer with them. And what I've realized is that, you know, there are so many tips for people following budgets, which is so important. We're having a cost of living crisis in the UK, millions of people having to rely on food banks and other things. And unfortunately, with meat and dairy still being subsidized by the government, and fruits and vegetables are artificially high, they should be subsidized. Exactly. There's a lot of work to be done around this area. So I do want to emphasize that I totally understand that everyone's in a different place, and my aim is just to help them find a way to eat more plants. So that's why I don't demonize things like frozen vegetables, or I do things myself like batch cooking and doing these things to make things easier and more affordable, or shopping in world food stores where you can get beans and things for a fraction of the cost. I live in London, where there's so many places like that. I'm not sure how it is in Ireland. It might be a bit harder, but
yeah,
I know that
there's some.
Yeah, so there's so many things, or even saying make a simple dal and rice. That's one of the cheapest foods that you can make. Once you've got something like a pressure cooker, or you can even do it on the stove, it could be about 60 pence for a portion, and that is, you know, brilliant for a really large portion of brown rice and
one of the biggest myths that needs to be destroyed, which again is the important role you guys have, that, you know, being vegan is so expensive. Because a lot of people see it has to have vegan written on a box. Well, the thing is, most of the food you're actually eating is vegan. If you look at most people's meals throughout the day and their dinners, you know, and things like that, like rice and lentils and chickpeas and couscous and all these different things.
Couldn't agree more.
Are so cheap.
I think it's because 60% of the UK's dietary intake is ultra processed foods, and unfortunately, a lot of the vegan ultra processed foods are also very expensive. So things like, you know, the cheeses and the transition meats and things, or I think that vegan meats and things have their place. Absolutely. If you're relying on Beyond Meat or any of these things, it could get quite expensive. So for a lot of people, I try to focus on the most nourishing, the most affordable things in the supermarket. So things like oats and chickpeas and sources of plant protein that are like legumes and tofu and things. And that's such a great things to bring in. Often it's just that people don't know how to cook some of these things. So things like tofu, they might just throw it in a pan and not realize you need to give it some loving care, the way that they would marinate chicken. And you know, it's the same for tofu. It's the same process. You just got to give your ingredients some loving care. But I think that it can taste absolutely amazing, and people are surprised at just how they can eat on a plant-based diet, feel really satisfied and full, yet reach their nutrition and health goals or weight loss goals. If that's, you know, an aim. In my practice, I try not to focus on weight loss only, because I think that unless you make that connection with your broader health, it can just become a slippery slope where you're only looking at weight loss. You're not looking at perhaps the impact on mental and physical health. And again, it can be quite hard in the culture we live in. There's a lot of diet culture sometimes as well that comes into plant-based eating, where it's like, you can't have this, you can't have that. And I am not about that. So I kind of work with people so they don't feel judged, because, you know, I'm also a human being. I've got a real sweet tooth, so I will definitely have a slice of cake at a party or things like that. And I want clients to know that they don't have to follow the perfect diet. It's really about making sustainable changes that they enjoy.
And stressing the bigger picture. I'm like, I do the same, you know, I always stress with the bigger picture. It's about lifestyle, not diet. Again, diet is a short-term mentality, and what 99.9% of people are going to fail at ultimately, because even if they're very mentally strong and they stick to the diet for, let's say, 12 weeks, when it ends, their brains focus on the end, and when the end point comes, it's like reverting back to normal, because they haven't actually learned anything. They haven't really improved their lifestyle because we're focused on a diet. So the shift needs, and it's hard because, again, the health and wellness and diet industry is worth so much money. So it's bombarded down people's throats from every angle. And you said weight loss and body shape and all this is what's put out there, is what's important. But we need to keep working and sowing the seeds for getting people focused on lifestyle and healthy, active lifestyles, and completely away from diet, because without that shift, it's very hard for people to keep consistent and stay on the right track.
Exactly, and definitely kind of reducing the risk of chronic diseases and living kind of a longer, fuller life. we might be living longer years, but our health span is decreasing. So the years that we're healthy, and that's what it starts at an early age. So I just wrote the chapter on lifestyle medicine for Ella Mills, or better known as Deliciously Ella's new book, which is out in August. And thank you. And I touch on this in our book, Living PCOS Free, as well. We've got lots of information on things beyond just nutrition. So I'm super passionate about nutrition. I can't imagine being anything but a nutritionist, but I also got board certified in lifestyle medicine, because when you realize that nutrition, yes, I think it's the cornerstone, it's one of the most important pillars of lifestyle medicine. But lifestyle medicine also incorporates other pillars of well-being, to understand that they're all interconnected. They're sort of like this domino effect that we talk about in our book. So things like emotional well-being, sleep, having enough restorative sleep. We need about 7 to 9 hours a day. Movement or exercise, getting enough physical activity is really key. Avoiding risky substances like drugs and minimizing alcohol as far as possible. And then stress management as well. Most of us are chronically stressed and not really aware of it, and understanding little techniques, whether it's deep breathing or walking in nature with your dogs. Everyone finds different ways to de-stress. What works for you might not work for me. You might hate yoga, I might love yoga, or it could be anything. It's about understanding what are your stress triggers, how can you identify them, and what is going to make you feel better. So all of these things are interconnected, and that's why if just focusing on one is not necessarily going to be give you the results that you're looking for. And I know that because I used to be really, I was like, okay, my nutrition is great, but I was neglecting my sleep or neglecting my stress management, and I noticed that my PCOS symptoms would show up whenever I did that. And that's why I see clients and I always integrate lifestyle medicine into my work. So this is a real evidence-based approach. It's not the same as integrative or functional medicine. It works hand in hand with Western medicine, where if someone comes to me and they're looking just at their diet, I will also, in the questionnaire before they work with me, they answer questions around their sleep. Do they have any pets? What the relationships are like? How much screen time are they getting? Because it's really important for me to get a full picture. If they're chronically stressed and sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night, we know that affects your blood pressure, your blood sugar control, your mental health, your physical health. It can lead to things like even feeling inclined to binge eat, because it messes up the satiety and hunger hormones. So that balance kind of goes out the window when you've had a really poor night's sleep. I think everyone's had that, where you've had 3 hours sleep and then you're just snacking on everything, and I certainly have. So I always try to kind of identify these things in all my clients, so they understand the whole picture of kind of healthy living.
Fantastic. And that's the way it needs to be. I just said, looking at a very broad spectrum of areas, because they're all interconnected anyway, and every little one has a huge impact. Like even the sleep side of things, and the fact you're getting poor sleep or too little sleep, cortisol release, what's that then going to lead to? And it's like a domino effect. And it's like I always say to people, it's like a massive list of positive action steps around your lifestyle, health and well-being. And your goal every day and week should be to tick as many of them as you can, and just keep working on ticking. And by focusing on the adding positive steps, the negative ones typically start to drop off. So instead of having to focus on the negative ones, I need to get rid of this, focus on the adding. And when you add, typically the bad ones tend to drop off anyway. So it's a better approach.
I do prefer that sort of positive approach, rather than saying you can't do this or don't stay up late watching TV. I try to focus on positives. Could you go for an early morning walk? Because we know that morning daylight is actually beneficial for sleep-wake cycles, can help you fall asleep better at night and have better quality sleep. So little things like that, which are more positive, is actually it's much more beneficial. You see much better results in terms of behavior change, in terms of mindset, in terms of someone sticking to their goals, rather than telling someone not to do something. When you're told not to do something, it's the first thing you want to do.
Yeah, it's like the Simpsons. I don't know if it's a Homer or Bart, but it's like, don't press the red button, and then it shows his mind, and he just wants to desperately press the red button. Which are Bart or Homer and the Simpsons. So when we're told not to do something, even if we're an adult, children especially don't want to do it, but as an adult, you're still a child inside, so you still want to as well. So not doing something being told not to do something is what you'll always want to do then.
Exactly. And I'm sure people on your podcast have talked about this before, but I really try to understand my clients' individuality and understand their why. So everyone has a different why. I would say, like, know your why and remind yourself every day in whatever little way. It could be walking in nature, reminding yourself of the urge to protect this beautiful planet, or understanding it could be something very personal to you. Maybe you want to play with your grandchildren, or you want to be able to run a marathon. It could be anything, but ideally something that isn't tied to just a physical, like an aesthetic goal, but something that's a bit deeper, that gives you a sense of purpose. And that usually really helps. Reminding yourself of that brings yourself back to who you are and helps you make these changes that stick. But some people come to me and they go, oh, I don't have time to cook, I don't have time to do X, Y, and Z, and they're really nervous. They say they worry that I'm going to start telling them they've got to be sprouting legumes for 2 hours a day or whatever. And it's more about understanding where they're at and how they can make changes in their lifestyle. It's no good if I'm giving every single person the same plan or giving them the same objectives. It's every single person is different. I work with single mums, investment bankers, families of 6, all these different people in different areas and different stages and lives as well, and different cultures, because culturally relevant health advice is very important. I'm South Asian. I work with South Asian clients, with different clients from minority ethnic backgrounds, and understanding that quite often some of the general guidance they're given is not relevant. So just being told to have quinoa salads and sandwiches isn't really going to work. They're going to have to tailor it to their own culture. And all of these cultures generally, whether it's like a lot of African cuisines or Indian cuisines, a lot of South Asia have prioritized plants, as I mentioned earlier. So you can enjoy your cultural foods and you can be vegan or plant-based. You can introduce things like plantain and yams and dosa and idli, like so many different types of cultural foods that can fit in and that work really well. And that's why I'm really passionate about that, because I want everyone to access this information, not just for maybe a privileged few, it's for everyone. And that's why I do the charity work that I do. I try to put out as much information as possible freely on my Instagram and my website and things as well.
Yeah, so like it's such a valuable, crucial approach the way you do it, and it's how it needs to be done, that you have to personalize things, because one size does not fit all. Again, go back to even the diet industry. That's why it's doomed to failure when you go on these things, because it's not exactly personalized to you. You have to take your own situation. It's like if someone is mainly eating processed food all the time, in terms of like animal-based processed food, they're not going to suddenly just start eating lentils and a bit of quinoa and stuff like that, or taking a lot of time to make big salads or smoothies or anything like that.
Yeah.
They need to have, what's the next little step I can take to be a little bit better than I am? So the way you personalize is so crucial.
Completely. And I think a lot of diets and other things come from a place of kind of punishment and self kind of loathing almost, and saying, I need to do this, I need to be better, rather than coming from a place of showing yourself love and saying, okay, I want to do this for X, Y, and Z, for myself, my family, for the world, whatever. I just don't think they come from that negative place, and that really means that often they don't stick and can cause a lot of harm as well. In our book, we talk about weight cycling and kind of yo-yo dieting and how that's detrimental, how it can impact cortisol and again affect your sleep, your mental health, your relationships negatively. So yes, I do work with people who have got backgrounds of disordered eating. I work with people with all kinds of areas, and mental health does come a lot into my work because people are trusting me with intimate details about their relationship with food, sometimes their lifestyle, their bowel habits. We discuss all of these things with zero stigma. I don't bat an eyelid. Maybe it's because I grew up in a medical household, so I was always eavesdropping on my parents' conversations with each other where they would discuss other nitty-gritty of medical life. But I think it's important to destigmatize a lot of these things. A lot of the work that I do is about opening up conversations around areas like reproductive health and choices, and again, the same applies for food. There's so many areas that are seen as taboo or that people can't mention, but we need to be talking about this. And I know Dame Deborah James recently passed away, and she did amazing work to raise awareness of colon cancer and how common that is. And I think it will help so many people, and just starting these conversations is really key.
Yeah, completely. Like this way, it's getting the right information out to people and the right kind of guidance is so crucial. So let's take a case study here, because again, look, you've so much you've to share and so many tips and everything. So we'll get a little specific here. So imagine I'm coming to you and I'm the typical person. I'm into my training, maybe again, even just take a fitness instructor. All my education has been around need for whey proteins and meat and eggs and eating 10 times a day, make sure there's meat in every part of the diet. I'm consuming all of that. Obviously, over time, I've developed a couple of health conditions as a result of that. and blood pressure, all the little things, as well as, just generally not feeling good. I might look good, but as you alluded to yourself, even, you can look good and internally not be in the prime health. And that's, again, a big thing in society. It's so much about image, when so many people might look good on the outside, but inside they're in a terrible state. And at the end of the day, poor health will come back and bite you in some form at some stage in your life. So we need to start making people see that it's not just about the outside, it's about the inside even more so, and how your body is processing and what's going on inside. But if I came to you and I say, look, I'm after watching, again, take even like your dad, Forks Over Knives, or any of these movies or Game Changers, if I'm into fitness and training, and I really want to make changes, but I'm just completely lost because I'm so used to eating meat and all that kind of stuff and being trained in that way. So obviously my brain is conditioned around that whole lifestyle. What are the kind of initial kind of tips and strategies you would give me as that kind of person, which would be quite common, really?
Well, I definitely think education is key. So I would send you some useful podcast resources. There's some great resources out there by plant-based athletes, and by, I think, Simon Hill, who's a nutritionist, has some great things for plant-based athletes. I do work with various people who are incredibly active, and some not professional athletes, but people who are kind of in amateur sports teams and things like that. I would really work to help you understand that you can get all the protein you need from plants. And if someone's doing weight training, or they have quite high energy needs and they're trying to build muscle, then 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein is what's needed. So it's going to be quite a significant amount, but that is really possible to get on a plant-based diet. I would recommend switching the whey protein to something like a pea, brown rice, and maybe hemp protein smoothie, and adding in greens and beetroot, which we know can aid recovery and performance, and trying to really get in more micronutrients into your diet. So in your smoothie, if you're just having a whey protein shake, could you switch that obviously to a plant protein, but then add in some greens, add in the beetroot, add in maybe some cacao powder or something like that, and then switching out the chicken breast, which I assume is probably a staple of your diet if you're following that, to tofu or seitan or tempeh. Tempeh has a biological value similar to animal protein, and all plants contain all 9 amino acids, but tempeh, which is a fermented soybean product originally from Indonesia, for those of you who may not know what it is, it's now available in UK supermarkets. It's really, really delicious, has a really similar amount of protein to chicken, and it's also contains all those micronutrients that are incredible. So iron, potassium, fiber, and it's a really great food to add in. So you could add that into your stir fries, into your salad bowls, and then really adding in more micronutrients is important. So adding in some fruit, lots of veggies, cruciferous vegetables, dark leafy greens, which are so important for improving blood flow and aiding performance and recovery. So a lot of it, the reason a lot of plant-based diets can really help with athletic performance is improve recovery as well. So that time in between, because it reduces that inflammation that's going on. A lot of us have that chronic inflammation. So I would explain all of these things and really try to educate the person that's in front of me, rather than just telling them what to do and say, okay, switch out the chicken for tofu, and they'll probably be worried about soya and reproductive health at that point and things. And I'm sure my mum has busted some myths around soya because she's super passionate about that. But soya is safe for all genders, for all ages, and it's something that I include in my diet 2 to 3 times a day. It's an amazing food. So
while you're on cider, Rohini, like, really blast that myth. I know, I spoke to your mum about it, but I think we can't blast this myth enough. Just give people some of the real facts again around soya.
Yeah, so soya is just a bean, and as my mom calls it, it's a magic bean. It's what you might know as edamame, or what we try to recommend is that people have the minimally processed forms of soya, because that also contains high micronutrient amounts. So soy milk, soy yogurt, and go for the fortified options with calcium, because that's going to be beneficial for bone health as well. And tofu, tempeh, soya beans, natto, edamame, there's so many different types. It's really rich in protein. It's a great source of fiber, calcium, potassium, manganese, magnesium, you name it, iron. It's an amazing food, and it actually is beneficial for both men's health and women's health. In women's health, it's beneficial for the symptoms of polycystic ovary syndrome, beneficial for fertility, and for men, it can reduce the risk of prostate cancer, particularly if started in childhood, particularly if you're swapping out cow's milk for soya milk. It's going to benefit you, and it's low in fat but rich in the the healthy kinds of fats. And you can see incredible results when you switch to soya from animal protein. So highly recommend that. I think beans and lentils are super important as well. You obviously need to introduce those gradually if you've been eating a very animal protein heavy diet, and I have a great bloating fact sheet on plant-based health professionals UK on how to introduce legumes, and starting with maybe a tablespoon of lentils, working your way up to the larger beans gradually. And now I can eat cans and cans of beans without a problem, but I used to have quite bad IBS when I was younger, and lots of issues, and that can often be the case if you've got PCOS or you've got anxiety and other things. And a lot of people, because the average intake of fibre in the UK is 17 grams when the recommended daily amount is 30 grams, I know for a fact that I get between 60 to 70 grams of fibre a day, which is more than double the recommendation.
I'd be the same.
Again, so fibre is super protective for chronic disease risk, and incredibly important, both soluble and insoluble fibre. And that's why things like starting your day with a bowl of porridge oats, this is what I recommend for the athlete that's seeing me, and adding in some nuts, adding in some berries that are rich in antioxidants and anthocyanins, so blueberries in particular, but any berries, any fruit, really looking at that overall ways to combat inflammation, but also meeting their protein goals and getting in complex carbohydrates as well, because you need those for recovery and performance. People often forget that protein isn't this sort of separate isolated nutrient. Food comes as a package. So when you eat plant protein, you're getting all these other benefits. And we know that just swapping 3% of animal protein in your diet for plant protein significantly reduces mortality risk, and reduces the risk of these common chronic diseases like colon cancer, which 40% of which I think is caused by eating processed meat like ham and sausages and other things. So I would look at the individual, I would look at how their sleep is, I would look at all of these things, because that's so important if they're training. But often it's about education, and once they see the science for themselves, I always try to work out how someone is. Are they a podcast learner? Are they someone that likes to read? So trying to understand what style suits them, but education is always key for me. I'm not about just telling them what to do without educating. Education has to be there, because I don't want someone to be seeing me for 6 months. I want to give them the resources and help them get on with their lives, knowing where to turn if they have future problems. But I think that hopefully that answers the question.
And I agree with you hugely on that in terms of education. It's like, the way I've always worked with people is, you tell them something they, let's say, is good to do, but always explain the why, because if they understand the why, they're more likely to do it. If, naturally, sometimes you won't want to do the right things. It's just how our brains work sometimes. But at least then you have that voice back ahead. If you don't do this, then this will be the repercussions. So we always realize the repercussions of it if you have the knowledge. Whereas a lot of the time, whether it be coaches, health coaches, trainers, whatever it might be, it's more nearly military style, telling people what to do.
Exactly. And that's why even for this person, if they're not like used to eating beans and lentils, it's about bringing them in slowly. And that's why tofu and tempeh and things, which do contain fiber, but they may not cause the same kind of bloating issues if they're new to eating more fiber. That's something that's good to add in initially. And seitan, which is wheat gluten, that's a great high protein source as well. So there's so many different things that they can add in and meet their requirements. It's not all about protein. The micronutrients and the complex carbs and the healthy fats like avocado and olive oil and things, these are all really important. So it's looking at the whole picture, and hopefully they feel that when they wake up, they're aching less, that they have more energy, and they're reducing their risk of chronic diseases, because we know that just because you're an athlete doesn't mean you're not at risk of these things as well, particularly if you're having a very animal protein rich sort of just chicken breast and whatever sort of diet, and you're not really getting all of that stuff in. And they probably find that they are less bloated because so many people have some degree of lactose malabsorption. It's over 70% of the world. So they probably feel better and have probably less stinky flatulence as well as a result, because whey protein is notorious for that.
And like one of the most important things you said and spoke of there, which is so rarely if ever spoken about, is fiber. Like it's the most important thing. It's basically the vehicle to get the nutrients in and the vehicle to get the toxins out, and has such an important
Absolutely.
role. Yet, like even if you take the standard recommendation of like 4 or 5 pieces of fruit and veg a day, is like so minimal and so tiny. And scarily, the vast majority of people don't even hit that target when,
I
really
know.
should be saying 10, 15, 20, 30 portions. Even in a smoothie alone, you can get 5 to 10 portions, not to mind the rest.
Completely agree. And so much of that is down to, unfortunately, the lack of education, the lack of availability and access as well, which is down to government wider systemic issues as well. But it's comes down to education, and only 1 in 10 adults in the UK get enough fiber. It's really, really shocking. So that's why raising awareness of all of this stuff is key. My focus is very much on what you can bring in rather than what you can take out. So if I was working with someone and they were very resistant to removing the animal protein, I would ask them to keep swapping things in and gradually crowd out those foods, because sometimes people are not willing to make a radical change, and that's okay. But it's about meeting them where they're at, and once they start to feel the results and see that the muscles aren't shrinking, that they're feeling good, that they probably have a bit more energy, they tend to trust you and kind of come on board. But I think that's why it comes down to that. It's like not kind of infantilizing people, not patronizing them and thinking they can't understand this just because they're not a nutritionist. Of course they can. A lot of people are hungry to learn more. They just haven't actually questioned a lot of these things. And once they know the facts, they can feel really empowered to share that with other people. Maybe they're going to share it with other people in the gym. Maybe they're going to share it with their friends and family. You don't know how you could affect people. It all has a ripple effect.
Exactly, like a domino effect. And it's especially what you just said there is important, like to share it in a way that's actually understandable, as opposed to complete scientific jargon, which, again, for some professionals, is nearly showing off themselves, but it's not relatable then for the person who's listening. So we need to, again, keep our language to understandable and very simple. Conversation definitely needs to happen more and more and more. It's like around, like tied in with fiber, but the whole bowel movement thing, because it's such a telltale sign of a person's health. And I'm sure you've noticed, just as I have, I've noticed over the last few years, especially, more and more clients are actually seeing it as normal if they have no bowel movements in a day, maybe one every 3 days, and even only one in a week or something. And like that's such a sign of how poor your health is and how poor the processes within you are, when we should have a couple of normal bowel movements a day. And this is again where the fiber conversation needs to be more.
No, absolutely. And people, when they make these changes, they feel so much better as well. Their skin becomes clearer, they have more energy, they feel happier. So just raising awareness that so many people struggle with some kind of digestive issue or bowel malfunctions. There's so many different areas that plant-based diets are very wide-reaching. Their benefits for reducing inflammation, reducing the risk of chronic diseases, increasing fiber intake, increasing micronutrient intake. Obviously, there are some micronutrients we need to pay attention to on a plant-based diet. I try to be very practical. Obviously, I recommend B12 supplementation for everyone on a plant-based diet, and many other people can also benefit from it. Vitamin D supplementation, particularly if I take it throughout the year because I've got darker skin, but everyone in the UK is recommended to take it from September to early April, because we're in the northern latitudes, we don't get enough sun at that time. And in the summer, you want to get out, expose your arms and legs, for depending on the color of your skin. And obviously I always protect my face with SPF and things, but everyone just needs to follow the guidelines on that. But then there are other micronutrients to pay some attention to. But the same would be if we were living in a plant-based world, and the government would be fortifying flour with B12 or other things, but they fortify it with folic acid or things that omnivores are often deficient in. So that's why if you're a plant-based eater, you just need to be prudent about this and make sensible choices. But you can get almost everything from your food. So just to emphasize that, you don't need to be a nutritionist to navigate it. It can be really overwhelming at first when you read all these things on social media, but social media is, it really is important to take a lot of what you read on social media with a pinch of salt. And also check that you're following people that are qualified and you're getting evidence-based information, because we need people to be healthy to thrive on a plant-based diet, and not people to avoid supplementing on B12 and then getting nerve damage and immense fatigue and iron deficiency. Well, not it's a megaloblastic anemia. You know, those are real issues. So I think it's just important to keep educating and getting the right information out there.
Yeah, and like, you know, people, even if they feel, I'd love to move towards a plant-based lifestyle, but they naturally have certain fears, again, conditioned and everything, think so because of the whole, you know, food industry and animal and dairy and so on.
Yeah.
You know, things like calcium, iron, you know, some of the most important nutrients that people do need to get. Give people a couple of indications of where they can actually get these on a plant-based diet, because so many think, like calcium especially, if you don't have dairy, you're in big trouble. Well, obviously, it's the opposite's true.
Yeah, so calcium is actually abundant in plants and in the roots and things, and that's why so many different cultures, that's why there's a lot of lactose intolerance, for example, in parts of Asia and things, and Africa, because a lot of the it's quite complex actually, but then a lot of the calcium can be found in dark leafy greens, in things like legumes and beans. Tofu is an amazing source, particularly if you get calcium set tofu. I do recommend everyone consume fortified plant milks and yogurts. In the UK, the RDA for calcium is for adults is 700 milligrams, and it goes up, I think, if you're breastfeeding or you're older in age. So women after the menopause and things like that, if you've had a diagnosis of osteoporosis. But it's quite easy to get that amount on a whole food plant-based diet. I do recommend the calcium fortified plant milks and yogurts. Organic, unfortunately, are often not fortified in the UK, so just to be conscious of that. But I always recommend going for that sensible fortified option. But other great sources are things like chia seeds and figs and sesame seeds and white beans like cannellini beans and butter beans, and then low oxalate green leafy vegetables like broccoli and kale and bok choy. Those are really great to get. So things like spinach, which are higher in oxalates, ideally you want to cook them. You don't really want to be having them in large amounts raw, and they're great. You know, I put a handful sometimes in smoothies because it's rich in vitamin C, but just to be practical about where you can get it from. So it's not something I worry about at all. I easily meet my calcium recommendations, and once you start, just if you're concerned about any of this, you can use a tool like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer. I don't recommend using these long term. I think they can become obsessive, but for a few days just to see if you're getting the right amount, but it doesn't need to be perfect science. Similarly with iron, you can get iron from an abundance of foods, of plant-based foods. So, and iron deficiency anemia is not more common in vegans than it is in omnivores as well. One of the biggest causes of iron deficiency anemia is actually heavy periods. So if you've got heavy periods and you menstruate, it's important to get that checked out. But you can get plenty of iron from, again, green leafy vegetables, beans, like things like kidney beans and things like that. Tempeh is a great source of iron. Nuts and seeds, both, they're really rich in micronutrients. I always have a handful of nuts every day. I try to put seeds in my salads and things like that. So just eating a variety of those foods is going to benefit you for sure. And then there are other, in terms of iron, there are when you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you get it from everything. Even oats have a good amount of iron in them, and so just eating a variety of whole plant foods is going to benefit you, with adding in the fortified plant milks and yogurts, and then the calcium set tofu as well.
Yeah, the variety, I think, is the key thing, and this is where people need to, again, be willing to just try and experiment. You know, just add in, again, like we said earlier, adding is a lot more positive than concentrating, cutting out and eliminating. So, you know, add something in every day, add something in every week, you know, different vegetables you haven't tried, try a new recipe, you know, like that. If you're having chicken curry all the time, try a chickpea curry.
Exactly.
Something simple
and little nutrition hacks that help. So I like to share these on my Instagram, that vitamin C aids the absorption of iron. So if you're having iron-rich foods, say you're having broccoli in your stir fry, pairing it with red pepper, which is rich in vitamin C, increases uptake. Or if you're having oatmeal or porridge, then having some kiwi fruit or berries on top is going to help you absorb more iron. So these little tips can make a huge amount of difference, just understanding how food works and understanding these little things. But plant-based diets are abundant in micronutrients like iron, like calcium, magnesium, manganese, potassium. There's there's honestly thousands of micronutrients, not all of which we even know, but you can get all of these on a plant-based diet. So over supplementation shouldn't also be encouraged. Like taking in too much iron is also not good. Iron's a pro-oxidant, so you want to just check your levels in the normal range. If you're concerned about any of this, then you can get a simple blood test. But for most people, the really key things to supplement are definitely B12 and vitamin D. And then iodine is another one that is really important for immune health, for thyroid health. It's something that a lot of people are deficient in, and we need a small amount, a trace amount, 150 micrograms, and you can get it in seaweed, but seaweed does have variable amounts. So the easiest thing is just to take a supplement, because most people are not eating regular amounts of nori seaweed or dulse every single day. I do like to sprinkle it onto stir fries or in my salads and things from time to time. And we don't have iodized salt either in the UK. So you can get enough iodine from having, I recommend taking a supplement unless you're a regular seaweed eater, in which case you need to be careful. Some seaweed needs to be avoided, like hijiki, which can be have quite high amounts or be contaminated as well. And then kelp can also be too high in iodine. So that's another example. But it just shows that, understanding food and where nutrients come from, it can be really empowering once you understand it. But on a daily basis, my focus is on just eating a variety of different foods, including a good amount of plant protein in every meal, because that keeps me really satiated. And it also comes with all the amazing micronutrients I've just mentioned. So I try to eat legumes 3 times a day. So it could be tofu scramble for breakfast. For lunch, you could have like a chickpea curry, as you said. For dinner, you could have a salad with tempeh, or you could have a tofu dish, or a black bean chili, or a lentil bolognese. It could be so many different things, even lentil shepherd's pie. You can adapt it all to all your favorite recipes, but legumes are super important. And then I might have a dessert with soy yogurt and blueberries on top for a snack. So I do get in a lot of legumes. And even for one of my favorite breakfasts, though, is porridge. I'm an absolute porridge addict.
The same, yeah. Nearly every day for the last 20 years, I'd say.
Yeah, it's my favorite. And I love steel cut oats, or pinhead oats as they're often known. I think in Scotland and Ireland, I think that's what they're called, but they are the whole oat groats that are chopped in half, and they are slightly higher in fiber. They have a really good amount of protein. They're slightly higher in micronutrients as well. So I try to go for more intact whole grains. There are so many out there, and I work with clients who sometimes have celiac disease or severe gluten intolerance, and there are so many different grains that we don't even talk about or we don't even eat regularly. So I have things like amaranth in my porridge, or buckwheat, brown, and I love eating things like brown rice, wild rice, red rice, quinoa, so many different things. And then different types of potatoes as well. All potatoes are really healthy. 90% of the potassium is in the skin, so you want to keep the skin on when you're eating this. Intact whole grains are just less processed, so they do contain more micronutrients. And if you soak them the night before and then cook them, or you can sprout them even better, but you significantly improve the nutrient uptake as well. So they're just super delicious. They add a different kind of flavor. I make things like spelt risotto and things, and you just get this amazing nutty sort of taste from things. So if you're wondering where on earth do I get these grains, try and visit your local bulk food store. Quite often they have discounts on the grains that aren't as popular, so you can actually pick them up for quite a cheap amount. And in the UK, a lot of these grains are actually grown in the UK. You can now get things like British quinoa and things that aren't so resource intensive and stuff. So that's really helpful for people to know.
And the thing is, like you've shared so many options there. There's so many options, so much variety. Yeah. So it's like when people have the most common fear is, if I go plant-based, I'm cutting all this out. What am I going to possibly eat? Like, the options are literally endless, and there's so many different combinations. And it's not as like if you take a meat-based diet, there's very standard dishes. Whereas if you take even just something simple as curry, how many different types of curry are possible to make, or casseroles?
Absolutely.
It's endless possibilities.
Completely agree. And it's just about having that diversity of plants. And we know that the American Gut Project showed that at least 30 different plants in your diet every week can help foster a healthy gut microbiome. So just mixing it up. If you always have brown rice, try wild rice, or try millet or something else. Or if you always have red peppers, try yellow peppers, or another vegetable like courgette. You can just mixing it up. Even if you're someone that likes your staples, just think, could I add in something different here? Could I add in a handful of extra kale or greens into my stir fry or my curry? Greens are the most micronutrient rich and nutrient dense food per calorie on the earth, I think. So I just try to get a variety of those in cruciferous vegetables like cauliflower, kale, rocket, cabbage. All of these things are so incredible, and they're amazing for hormonal health, which we talk about in Living PCOS. Really, obviously, all genders, we want to optimize hormonal health, these are incredible foods that are also very good for reducing cancer risk. And there's no one food that's a panacea that's going to completely halt or prevent your risk of chronic disease. That's why understanding that there are no superfoods, they all are superfoods. Exactly. It's really getting in that variety. You don't need to spend loads on fancy powders or on goji berries. You can get it from simple things, that are some of the cheapest foods in the supermarket. But it's just, sometimes the darker coloured or brightly coloured fruits and vegetables are particularly rich in polyphenols and in antioxidants. So if you can, try and go for those darker coloured things. So if you have a choice between red cabbage or white cabbage, go for the red cabbage. And just simple things like that can make such a big difference in understanding that there is no good or bad food. I don't talk about food like that. I don't think it fosters a healthy relationship or compassion. It's really looking at what can you bring in, what can you replace, what's going to give you joy. And it's the whole bigger picture, as you mentioned. I don't like saying everything in moderation, because I think that can be really confusing for people, but it's understanding that you have got the bigger picture. One single meal is not going to make or break you. It is about the pattern. So I do absolutely go out to eat with friends, and it's important to have that. If you're having a very rigid diet, you might be doing that for medical reasons. Of course, everyone's situation is different, but if you're worrying so much about food or about regimentally kind of sticking to a specific thing, it might stop you from living joyfully and connecting with others. So I recommend also finding people who share your interests as well. Like you could join a walking group or make friends virtually like we have just now, Dave. There's so many ways to connect with people, and in your local community, there are so many different things you can do, like book clubs and hiking groups and other stuff where you can make friends and share things with people. Before, my whole social life would revolve around going to the pub or going to bars, and I thought that was the only way you could socialize. And now I just have a very different life, and I made friends by doing activities that I find meaningful, that I find joyful. It's much suits my personality much better, and it's also just enabled me to live a healthier life whilst also connecting with others, which is super important for reducing chronic stress. And we know isolation can increase those risks as well. So don't be isolated. That's kind of my message throughout this podcast when I'm talking about my journey, is that isolation is, we're social beings. We belong in kind of living in harmony with each other, with nature. So find your tribe is really important.
Completely. And like connecting with like-minded people is one of the most valuable things you can do. And like you give loads of examples there how to do it, where it's not just the pub, book clubs, walking clubs, cooking clubs. There's endless possibilities. Like connect with like-minded people who kind of feed your soul and lift your spirit, because again, you've like-minded ideas, and that's really important. And like on the food side, creating a positive energy and positive association around food is so important, because most people do have a negative association because they're only focused on what they shouldn't be doing all the time, instead of just creating a positive association around it and creating positive energy out of adding, instead of focus on eliminating for short periods and then reverting back to the way they were and then feeling terrible about it, and that yo-yo vicious cycle that most people are trapped within. So it's really important information that you're sharing with people around all of that, and like the variety that there is, and getting in as many different colors and types of foods in every single week, and not seeing everything as just this moment. Like everything you do this moment is impacting the future, whether that's tomorrow, next week, next year. And we need to be mindful of that all the time, especially with the prevalence of so many diseases these days, when at the end of the day, what you do today is impacting your chances of contracting any of these diseases. So we must be mindful of the bigger picture and not just the short term and the immediate. Rohini, you shared so much incredible information, and I'm sure it's even just a snippet of what you can share. So a lot of people, I'm sure, listening, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready. Plant-based lifestyle sounds absolutely awesome. I want a piece of it. So if you were to kind of summarize, like, top kind of 5 steps for someone to transition to a plant-based lifestyle from, let's say, just the average typical animal consuming based lifestyle, what would be kind of 5 main tips you'd give as a starting point for people?
So my number one is to know your why, because if you don't know your why, day 2, it's going to be game over. So finding out why you want to do this and empowering yourself. It could be watching documentaries like Seaspiracy and understanding the impact on animals and billions of animals and on the planet that's going to keep you motivated. I certainly remind myself of this regularly. That's the reason I went vegan all those years ago. That's really key. So knowing your why. I would say number 2 is to learn the nutrition basics. So just empowering yourself with that information, because it's going to make navigating it so much easier once you know, okay, where do I get X, Y, and Z from? What is key? And that's why plant-based health professionals or the Vegan Society, they have great resources where you could go and check that out. And there are challenges as well, like Veganuary, or we have a 21-day whole food plant-based challenge where you get recipes and steps to help you. So that's really helpful. And I would say number 3 is to figure out what kind of transition is best for you. Some people don't have a choice. They watch a slaughterhouse video and they go vegan overnight. Other people might take their time, but it's understanding that it's your individual journey, not comparing to others, and taking the time to make the transition by bringing things in rather than just removing things. So if you're removing meat and dairy, you want to be bringing in tofu, tempeh, legumes, and like beans and lentils, fortified plant milks and yogurts. You want to be bringing that in, not just taking out, because you're going to be very hungry if you're just removing all the meat and dairy and not having enough. And I would say number 4 is to eat enough as well. So a lot of people underestimate, because plant-based foods are generally lower in calories, but they're also very nutritious. You might end up losing weight, and that is not something everyone wants to do. So just making sure that you're eating the right thing, the right amount, and doing that is quite easy if you include enough legumes, in particular. So I'm a big fan of including enough beans and lentils and other things like that. And number 5 is to immerse yourself in this new lifestyle. So it could be going to veg fests, it could be connecting with like-minded people online, it could be finding a community, it could be volunteering, doing some volunteer work, maybe at an animal shelter or sanctuary. Anything like that, which is going to connect you with your original number 1 of knowing your why, is going to be beneficial for you, because perhaps your old friends are just wanting to go down to the pub, and you can still be friends with those people, but this is a new chapter for you. So connecting with new people is definitely part of that, and I think that's really important. And I do want to say number 6, because I really forgot this, which is number 6 is really to get into cooking if you can. When you cook your own food, it's such a powerful tool. I think everyone should learn to cook. It's an amazing skill, for self-care, for nourishing yourself. And I think that cooking from scratch can just change your life. So you could join a class at Made in Hackney, which we do a lot of virtual classes, but there's lots of different things online. There are YouTube videos, and getting a few basic things in your kitchen, maybe like an instant pot or a good blender or food processor, is just going to make it so much more joyful. You can make amazing things and batch cook and choose a few recipes you want to try every week, choose a few cuisines you want to experiment with. But cooking is such a great tip for starting a whole food plant-based lifestyle. 100%. So there's a lot in there, but that's kind of my go-tos. And I think once you kind of follow that roadmap for yourself and tailor it to what is right for you, it could be doing plant-based a few times a week. It could be just cutting out meat initially, whatever. It's different for everyone, but it's understanding that that you're on a journey, and that you have to keep reminding yourself why you're doing something. And that's because the world, unfortunately, isn't always aligned. It's if you just kind of go with what everyone else is doing, it's very hard to make the change. And that's why finding that inner purpose, but also externally from other people that are going to support you, encourage you. Sometimes even close friends and family can react really badly when you try and make a lifestyle change. I've had this with loads of clients where their partners, their friends, their family are really upset with them for even trying to make these changes. So that's why, people that support you, that love you, that care for you, even if they're new in your life, it's amazing. There's actually incredible connectivity now that we're all online, and in the pandemic and things, there's been even more connection in some ways online. It's been honestly incredibly difficult for the world, devastating for millions of people. But the one takeaway is that we are all connected. Everything, we are all connected around the world. All of us are. So yeah, just finding those people is key.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a positive the last couple of years, even making people who would have been very much against using technology nearly being forced to have to use technology, and now it's opened up a whole new world, and it's made the world even smaller than it was, so we can all connect no matter where we are, which is fantastic.
There is unfortunately a lot of misinformation out there as well. So for plant-based health, anyone who's listening, it's just following those evidence-based resources I mentioned and looking at, you know, the right resources, because there is a lot out there and it's really confusing, and that can throw people off when they cut out entire food groups. They cut out all carbs, or they don't have any healthy fats in their diet, and then they end up feeling really rubbish. And everyone comes to me with the story of, oh, I have a friend, they went vegan and they felt exhausted and then they lost loads of weight and they gave it up. You know, it's hard for me to comment on individual cases, but generally whenever I probe, it's usually following a fad diet in some way.
Totally. It's like I always say, like we live in an age when there has never ever been so much information, but unfortunately the vast majority of it is absolute rubbish and just not true.
Yeah.
So it's trying to clear the confusion. This is where people like you are so invaluable, to clear this confusion and give people the facts and put people on the right path. And you know, the work you do is so invaluable. Like, you know, you're making a difference, and you don't just do it as a job and a career. You do it because it's your passion, which is the most powerful way to live, because you're purpose led. You know, and you're on a mission, and you're doing great work. And you know, you and others like you are literally crucial to making a positive impact in a world that needs it, because it's obviously such a, you know, in many ways toxic, negative world. But this positivity and, you know, positive change can come about by more and more people embracing these kind of lifestyles.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Yeah, that means a lot.
So if people want to find out more about you, which I'm sure they'll be mad to, you know, about you, your projects you're involved in and so on, where should they look?
So my website, rohinibajekal.com, I offer free discovery calls, 15 minutes for anyone who may consider working with me. There's zero obligation. I Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, please check out all our resources. My book, Living PCOS Free. This is not just for people with PCOS. There's actually, it's got over 30 of my own plant-based recipes inside. It's got loads of tips on healthy living, and it's loads of men have read it as well, have written to me and things. And partners of people with PCOS, but other hormonal conditions, or anyone just wanting to live a long and healthy life. And then Instagram, I'm super active on Instagram, particularly on my stories at Rohini Bajekal. I try and share lots of daily tips, recipes, insights, wellbeing, motivation, and different things on there, and just try and keep it as real as I can as well, and show that social media can sometimes be really just kind of overwhelming. Everyone's living these really glossy, perfect lives. So yeah, just trying to be myself really on there. But yeah, I'd love to connect with you. If you enjoyed this podcast, yeah, definitely give Dave's channel a like and a follow, and leave a comment as well, because it really helps with all the algorithms when we're trying to put out this positive information. There's unfortunately, yeah, a lot of misinformation out there, so we want all the good stuff to get views and to get circulated.
Yeah, exactly. And like that, we have to keep working on the algorithms. So any help we can get, like and sharing, commenting, everything, even if it's only a thumbs up or a smiley face, it all helps. We're all constantly trying to work with the algorithms to fool it and get more exposure to it. I'll include all the details, Rohini, in the show notes, guys. So keep an eye on that and all the different websites you mentioned. So look at them in the show notes. Rohini, it's been a pleasure having you on, an honor.
Thank you
As I said, I love your passion. I love what you do. You know, I can relate so much to what you're saying and the work that you do, being in, you know, similar kind of fields and being passionate about helping people. And we just have to keep doing our bit and keep sowing those seeds, and you know, it'll bear fruit eventually, and it'll have that domino effect. As we are noticing, especially over there in the UK, the growth plant-based vegan has been absolutely incredible in the last 5 to 10 years, you know, witnessing how quickly it's growing. And it's just a case of us keep pushing on and keep educating people. It's definitely education is the key.
Completely. The future is definitely plant-based.
Definitely. So keep up the great work. And, you know, I'm sure everyone who heard this will have got so much great information, so many valuable tips, and I'm sure many will be in touch and following your stuff. So I look forward to gaining from following your information.
Thank you, Dave. Great to chat. Thanks, everyone.
So everyone, I'm sure you enjoyed that episode. Please share it out there, give a like, give a subscribe, leave a comment. And, the bottom line is, as we keep stressing, evolve into the best version of you. It's about taking action, not just thinking about stuff, take action. Focus on adding, which was a big part of this podcast, add positive lifestyle habits, add stuff to your nutrition, add stuff to simple things like sleep, mindset, everything. You can do such simple little steps that will have a positive impact in your life, and each one will have a domino effect. And keep remembering what you do today impacts your future. So every single day, we're literally holding the pen and writing our future life. So you're creating your reality. So make it a good one, make it a vibrant one, make it one that fills you with happiness, which is what really life should be all about. So from the Mind Body Health podcast, myself, Dave Sheahan, and my wonderful guest, Rohini Bajekal, have an awesome day and keep taking positive action.